Each year for 25 years, the United Nations has held a conference of the world's governments to decide how to prevent climate change.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome to the opening of the United Nations Climate Change Conference.
The intention is to establish a global policy that each country will follow towards eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. This year, it is the turn of Britain to host the conference, known as COP26, which will be held in Glasgow.
It's coal, cars, cash and trees. Coal, cars, cash and trees.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has made clear his determination to lead the world on a path to net zero.
Green is good. Green is right. Green works.
To establish Britain's credentials as a global climate leader, the government has announced ambitious domestic climate policies, including banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars and abolishing the gas boiler that heats over 80% of British homes. But what if the British public disagrees with the Prime Minister and the government and their policies and ambitions? What if we don't want policies to be imposed on us from an undemocratic global political institution, which is unaccountable and whose far-reaching powers will be unchecked? COP26 will give no voice to people who may believe that neither global nor domestic climate agendas have been advanced in the interests of ordinary people. It will be a meeting between the most powerful people and interests in the world, from which any inconvenient perspectives have been excluded. To hear more about the many problems with the global climate agenda, tune into the daily FLOP26 live stream.
I put something in the water. They seek a cure for the conversation. They stole a march on your indecision. And the first to fall was laughter, just to quell the unoffended. They seek to murder your opinion. And the light has been turned out on the age of reason, replaced by blinding fires that burn wild across the region. For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. So I need you more than ever. I need your hand in this resistance, if we're going to go the distance. And if I ever doubted or think about my future, and if I'd want to live there, and the world outside is wondrous why, for a reason. If you can't decide, you must blow your own mind for that reason. For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. And that's no lie. Can be hard to know what you're feeling, what with all the lies that you're reading. If it's hard to say, you may mean it. Don't be lost thinking about tomorrow, when today is what you are living. Make today your new beginning. The light has been turned down on the age of reason, replaced by blinding fires that burn wild across the region. For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. So I need you more than ever. I need your hand in this resistance, if we're going to go the distance. And if I ever doubted, I think about my future. And if I want to live there, and the world outside is wondrous why, for a reason. If you can't decide, you must blow your own mind for that reason. For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. And that's no lie. So I need you more than ever. I need your hand in this resistance, if we're going to go the distance. If I ever doubted, I think about my future. And if I want to live there.
Hello and welcome to the first FLOP26 live stream. Many thanks to everyone for joining, and many thanks to the supporters of the project that have made it possible. Before I introduce this evening's guest, I'd like to quickly say what this project is about. The guests that are going to appear on this series of live streams each have views often based on a lifetime's work that have been for pretty much the duration of the UNFCCC process, the COP process, the annual ritual. They are unwelcome in polite society. But what is at stake is not just the views or egos of a few people who have been sidelined, who happen to disagree with the political consensus. That political consensus has been turned into a radical, far-reaching agenda for the transformation of society. But not once in the years that I've been covering the story of this agenda have I seen any care taken by any advocates of the climate agenda to check that their ambitions have any democratic legitimacy. They simply don't care what the millions of people in Britain or the billions of people throughout the world who will be affected by the utopian visions think or want. The public has been denied a debate on the scientific, political, ethical, economic, legal, and cultural principles that underpin that climate agenda. And this series is going to allow people with different views to put forward their criticisms. Dogma and orthodoxy are dangerous things, and debate and democracy are their antidote. So I can think of absolutely no better person to join me to help start this series than Dr. Benny Peiser. Benny was the director, is the director of Net Zero Watch, the new website and the campaigning arm of the Global Warming Policy Forum. It's fair to say that it is a very small think tank by the standards of Westminster, but which has for over a decade now stood alone in offering a second opinion on the all-party consensus, providing deep and expert analysis of the climate agenda and energy policy. The near total cross-party and media consensus used to make the GWPF and Benny perhaps the loneliest and least popular beings inside SW1, but for sure the most important and relevant organization to everyone outside that cozy consensus and orthodox that we're all going to be paying for decades to come. But all that has changed significantly in the last 6 months as public concern about the astronomical costs of net zero have been rising steadily. That is to say, Net Zero Watch is the only organisation representing the public's interest in UK politics, and it is the only think tank working with a growing number of MPs who are increasingly worried about the economic and political risk to the country and, of course, their jobs. Benny, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about your new project?
Net Zero Watch. Thanks, Ben, and good luck with your project. You won't run out of good topics over the next 12 or 14 days. How long this COP normally goes, I don't know. It depends. It will be deadlocked and it will drag on, obviously. Yes, Net Zero Watch has been really, really successful. We rebranded basically the Global Warming Policy Forum website. It is clear that the issue of net zero and the costs of net zero and the implications of net zero are of great, great concern to every individual household, every individual family in the country. And as we always thought right from the start when we launched the GWPF, 12 years ago, we always thought that the economics and the costs would eventually come to haunt people who have these utopian plans. And that's exactly what's happening now. People are beginning to realize that they will have to pay huge amounts of money to adhere to the demands of the green lobby. It's the biggest wealth transfer from poor to rich in the history of this country and the history of mankind. That's what we are concerned about. That's what we focus upon. That's what we want to inform and brief people about in a rational, calm, measured, and credible way.
Brilliant, brilliant. So when we've spoken before, you've mentioned, I mean, you haven't got a great deal of time for what I think you call the talking shop of COP26. I think we can all agree it's pretty pointless. But have you got any headline predictions? Have you got any? What do you think might happen over the next couple of weeks with the conclusion of that?
In many ways, COP26 is very similar to the previous 25 COPs. They have a very similar trajectory. It's as we know, it's an annual ritual. It's always the last chance. It's always time is running out. Hopes are high, and the COP will then eventually in the second week be deadlocked. It will face collapse, and then Boris will save it and, will take the credit for saving it, and there will be an agreement, and everyone will go home celebrating that, we've saved COP for another year, and we'll all look forward to COP27. But there are some differences, and I think the biggest difference this year to previous COPs is the realization that it's really, it's really going backwards. It's almost as if people fear that it's going to disintegrate somehow, in that people are waking up to the unrealistic assumptions that we could reduce CO2 emissions in the next 10 years.
Well, we'll get on to the detail, but I know, for example, some people are calling it a bit of a step backwards in its ambition. That prior to Paris, there was an idea that there would be a one-size-fits-all global policy, but that the innovation of Paris was to say, well, you can all decide what your contributions are, but you have to tell us, and then you have to commit to that. And then in a sense, by Boris's sort of, the UK government's ambition to get everyone into the net zero framework, that's something of a step back. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, I mean, the realization that there are a number of issues that are making this COP more difficult. The first is the world is beginning to realize that the kind of decarbonization, the renewables agenda in Europe is causing all sorts of big problems. The biggest of which is it's very expensive. So energy prices are going through the roof. It's very dodgy. It's very unreliable. So the national grids are becoming destabilized through these intermittent forms of energy production. And it's not going like predicted. The predictions were that the renewables are the future. They will be cheaper than conventional fossil fuel energy, and we'll have these wonderful green forms of energy and batteries that can produce electricity 24/7. None of it is actually materializing, and the world is looking at Europe and saying, do we really want to follow into these kind of unreliable, high-cost energy systems? And I think this realization is one of the reasons why there are growing doubts about the European model of decarbonization. And of course, the other is that the claim that renewables are so much cheaper than fossil fuels is just not true. Renewables remain very expensive. Fossil fuels remain very cheap. They remain very abundant. You can get them almost anywhere in the world. And so the combination of that has led to serious questions about the attractiveness of the net zero agenda.
Right. So it's flop, not COP or flop. It's a flop.
It's not. We're not there yet because we're still getting the same kind of slogans. And believe you me, COP26 will end in a success. Don't question that. Boris will save COP26 from collapse. In the last minutes of the conference, when collapse is very near, the UK will save the day. There will be an agreement, and they will announce that progress has been made, and we all look forward to COP27.
I do have a video to play of something similar from Josh, where you published last year. I recommend that viewers go and have a look at it. I'll put the link up later on in the description. The cycle of every single COP since 2007, I believe, but I'll play that later. Is that they all start off with great hopes, and then the hopes are dashed, and then the last minute deal that rescues the whole process at the end. It's quite a good little satire from Josh. So we discussed prior to this some headlines, some things that have been in the news, which I'll just see if I can. Yeah. So here's the first one. I thought people might want to hear your views on the Andrew Marr show today.
Yeah, the unbiased BBC.
The unbiased BBC.
Evidence how balanced they are. Look, there are 4 women and only 3 men. Now, that is clear evidence that the BBC no longer has any bias.
Yeah, right. So there is I think everyone knows. Oh, you can see it there. Alok Sharma, Greta Thunberg, and Ed Miliband, and a few other activists. I think who essentially might just as well be one person. Never mind the minister or the COP president designate, a teenage activist, and a secretary, a shadow secretary of state, former leader of the Labour Party. This epitomizes the BBC, doesn't it? I mean, apart from the fact that there's the gender balance.
Well, they clearly, there's a kind of gender discrimination. Clearly, the ban men. No blacks.
I think it's a person of color, possibly.
Not trans. They should have really put some trans spokesperson in there. Right. So I think they might be in trouble.
Are you going to be invited on the Marr show soon?
I think we're banned. We're still banned.
You're still banned, right? Yeah. Why is it an official ban? I remember people have spoken variously about the whether it was an unofficial or official.
I think there's a document saying there's no need to invite anyone critical of the government's policies, or anyone critical, basically. So let's put it this way. I'm not even sure I want to be on the BBC, to be quite honest. It's just ruins your reputation.
I think many people share the same view and don't really want to watch the BBC. Here's another one. Not the BBC, the great new GB News, which we...
It's a fair challenge, and one of the first things I did when I became Prime Minister was to get in the scientists and to go over the numbers for my own satisfaction at really quite some length. And there were all sorts of graphs and all sorts of points that they produced. But there was one thing that I've just found absolutely incontrovertible. It was this a vertical kink upwards in the anthropogenically caused temperatures over the last period, and projections for what would happen in the future. And I'm afraid that left me in absolutely no doubt about what we've got to do. The temperature rises and falls naturally over long periods of time, but we've seen nothing like this huge spike that is being caused by humanity. And we've got very little time to fix it. The temperature of the Earth will rise.
Right. Well, I think we know what you're going to say,
the
Boris. So I think but so yeah, we know what Boris is going to say. So he's had what struck me about this clip is that I mean, apart from the fact that we've heard it so many times, he's seen the hockey stick graph, right? And then he's summoned in some scientists. He says, I mean, I'd like to know who was there or who organised it, but he hasn't asked anyone else.
Normally, I mean, look, you can't believe a word he says. 10 years ago, he said exactly the opposite. And if the political weather changes, he will become a skeptic again. Boris, the good thing about Boris, he hasn't got any principles. He doesn't believe in anything. And so as the temperature change, I mean, the political temperature changes, he will change his views. He used to look for advice from Piers Corbyn, right? He used to be a radical climate skeptic when it suited him. He now thinks green things are much better. But believe you me, if the political weather changes, he will change as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it all spoke. I mean, I think you're right there. So I don't need to dwell on it. But I always think, where is the B team? Where is the? I mean, as the previous clip showed, there was no, the Mar clip. There's no opposition. There's no discussion. So anyway, here's the third. Sorry, Karen.
Well, this is the problem, because he only listens to his green advisors, and that makes him decide all the kind of poor policies that will eventually fail, terribly fail. We'll come to that, but that's part of the problem. Normally ministers, wise ministers, they used to ask as many advisors as possible, and then they pick the ones they think is for them, the best option. Boris doesn't do that. He only listens to one set of advisors, and that's why he will fail.
So, good points. Here's the article you sent me. The Tory blame game over COP26 has already started by Katie Balls in the Spectator. What do you make of that?
Yeah, of course. People are beginning to realize that COP26 is a complete waste of money. Huge amounts of money. Remember, the whole project was planned to be bigger than the London Olympics. Bigger than the London Olympics, remember? Now, this will be bigger than the Titanic. This will be a complete another fiasco. Of course, they will, they will sugarcoat and say, we've saved COP26 from fiasco and disaster. We saved the process and so on. But the reality is they are bickering like mad because they are realizing this whole process has been a complete debacle, complete fiasco. And I mean, every sensible energy and climate analyst could have told them that China and India are never going to accept net zero. Never. And they could have told them that this will not be a breakthrough. This will not achieve what 25 previous COPs never achieved. So this is what happens if you only listen to one set of green advisors. You suddenly believe your own utopias.
So how is that? I mean, I know I keep bringing it back to the lack of the debate, but how is it possible that doesn't get raised anywhere in 10 Downing Street or whatever the institutions nearby? And no one says, hold on a minute. There are 3 billion. Sorry, after you.
Every single critic of the green climate agenda has been purged, whether in the institutions, universities, whether it's in government. You cannot raise any questions. You cannot raise any doubts because we're dealing here with an apocalyptic cult, an end time cult that does not allow any questions. And unfortunately, like all end time cults, they will end, in disaster.
So the author, the delusion is of global Britain, a country of 60-something million people, giving an example to the half of the world's population that live in those two countries, which are developing, and if that process stops, will create an unprecedented and unfathomable conflict with themselves, which I'm sure those governments are aware of. And nobody, with all of those PPE degrees, with all of those masters, with all of those PhDs, with all of those professors from all of the institutions that public funding supports, none of them have said you haven't done this basic arithmetic and it's got through. That's remarkable.
Well, we've been there before. It's not unusual. We've been there before. Throughout history, we've had these mad collective hysteria and movements, dogmatic movements, where any critic would be purged. You really have to compare it to the kind of collective madness in the past. This is what happens if you abolish critical scrutiny, debate. That's what happens if there are no longer any critics allowed, no debates allowed, and the BBC only has one voice, and almost all institutions only follow one lead. That's the cul-de-sac you end up.
Presumably, I'm showing some clips from the opening now. So presumably that some similar ambition, some similar zealotry exists at the UN. Does that? Well, not similar, the same, but it's
yes and no. Yes and no, because obviously in the UN you have quite a number of governments whose very survival depends of not following this madness.
Right.
I mean, let's not forget, some of these countries, some of these governments cannot agree even if they wanted to, because they know if they were to go down that route, they would not survive. I mean, a country like China or India and many other Asian countries, even if they wanted to go down the renewables energy route, they would not survive contact with reality, and there would be revolution in these countries if you make life miserable for hundreds of millions of people.
So you being one of the very few organizations that that exist to criticize it, you've
from the start. Listen, Ben, I've been in this for nearly 50 years. I was one of the founders of the Green Party in Germany. I've seen it all, from the late 70s onward, from the early 70s onward. So I know this, as I said, the whole shebang for the last 50 years. I've seen it all. And I know that this is a utopian, millennial, apocalyptic movement that does not allow any critical debate, any critical assessment, which makes it impossible to change course, makes it impossible to make reforms, makes it impossible, to respond to problems. And that's the core problem. By and large, go on.
No. So I was going to say, I mean, most of your output relates to policy, but you've been criticized as denying climate change. But your points there, they're very much about the politics there. So science has got very little to do with understanding the COP meetings or the political process. Is that? I mean, am I getting that right?
Well, the science has been used to scare people into submission. Unfortunately, climate science has been completely infiltrated by radicals who claim, Armageddon and doomsday. That's very unfortunate. And people who are more moderate, who look at the science and say, yes, there's a greenhouse effect, and yes, we're pumping CO2 in the atmosphere, and yes, that has a warming effect, but we're not facing Armageddon. Anyone questioning the kind of worst case scenario has been purged out of university, out of their jobs, out of the media. And that has created this kind of collective hysteria in which it's difficult to make rational policy decisions. But we, as a think tank, have always focused on the policies rather than the science. By and large, we've accepted the basic science. We certainly are critical of these kind of exaggerated doomsday predictions and claims, everything is going down the drain. But we always knew that at the end of the day, it would be the policies that would crash and burn on contact with reality. And that's what we're now beginning to realize. These policies are not going to work. It's as simple as that. The public will not accept it.
I was showing the IPCC opening there, which I think crashed the stream briefly. But the interesting thing was there the president, the Italian president, said of the conference, not the president of Italy, they said that the science is what was her word now?
Non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. A full departure, a total departure from the whole tradition of science, from this kind of.
That's part of absolutely. That is part of the problem. Science has been ripped apart. The scientific tradition in Western that propelled Western societies to the kind of wealth and well-being that we've experienced in the past, and the kind of rational discourse, all of this has been destroyed in the name of saving the planet. In a way, I sometimes think it was almost inevitable. In a way, there is no shortcut for our civilization to go through apocalyptic, secular fear-mongering, which started essentially with the creation of the nuclear bomb. That's how it started in the 40s and 50s, and then developed into the environmental doomsday movement. I think there is no shortcut. We, as a society, will have to get through this mess and learn our lesson as a result. I think that in perhaps 10 or 20 years, when people realize that the climate models are far too extreme, that the warming is much lower than most people feared, people might reassess this collective hysteria and think again. That's my optimistic expectation. This is the optimistic view.
I think that's what they call a black pill these days, isn't it? That's quite.
Is this? I don't know what a black pill is. I prefer whiskey, to be quite honest.
Right. We were discussing also something, the news on Biden coming to COP26 after having begged OPEC to increase production. Do you want to talk about a bit about that? Because that was
well, this is again the realization just how dependent we are on fossil fuels. People don't realize that 30 years ago, 80% of the energy mix was fossil fuel based, and that after 30 years of the climate campaign, we're still 80% fossil fuel based. But the reason why Joe Biden is calling on OPEC to increase oil and gas production is that his approval rating are falling very steeply. And the reason why his approval ratings are falling is because gasoline or petrol prices in the US are rising steeply. He's, someone who, promised his voters he will shut down oil and gas and all the fossil fuel industry, until we realize just how damaging that is to his approval rating and the chances of the Democrats to win elections. And the same is true in Europe. As the energy prices go through the roof, the credibility of political parties diminishes. The risk of, electoral disaster grows. And this is particularly true for the Conservative Party, who have become the kind of social democratic party in the UK. They looked at the Angela Merkel model. Angela Merkel managed to keep in power from, 12, 13 years or so. And they forgot to mention that she destroyed her party in the process. The Christian Democrats in Germany are hardly scoring 20% in the vote. They are a past force, and if the Conservatives aren't careful, they will destroy the Conservative Party if they go too far with this green madness.
Right. So yeah, very, very much this agenda coming into contact with reality. On a similar point, I've got another clip here. I just saw today. If we can
Heat
see
pumps. Yes.
Heat pumps in the Daily Mail. They claimed £70,000
in grants. Yes.
In grants. That's a remarkable sum of money. I mean, some people may have less sympathy for them because they obviously live in an enormous, beautiful old barn conversion with and
it's a wealthy family. But
yeah,
what this family experienced, they obviously have enough money to insulate, new bifolds, double glazing, the whole place insulated, plus the 10, 12,000 for the heat pump. But what they're saying basically is, we've spent all this money for going green, and our daughter has to wear her coat to keep warm in the house. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you these heat pumps are just, electric cars, let's face it. You can actually drive an electric car. Yeah, okay. You might not get very far, but you can drive it. Okay. Heat pumps don't actually heat your home as well as gas boilers. So I've always said the ban on gas boilers is never going to work. There will be a revolution in Britain before people give up their gas boilers. Believe you me, it's not going to work. And Boris will be somewhere in an old age home somewhere, but it's not going to work. These heat pumps are just not a credible alternative to gas boilers.
Yeah, it's a startling amount of money. So you can build a house for £70,000.
No, well,
you can't get the land, but you could.
It's a staggering amount of money because they obviously live in an old farmhouse. Now, this is part of the problem. The older the house, the more expensive it is to insulate the house. And a heat pump only works in a flat or a house that is completely insulated. Otherwise, because these heat pumps don't actually heat very well, you need to insulate the place to keep it warm. And even then, it's not really that warm. Yeah.
So to roll things back a bit, let's call it the blob. We frequently get blamed.
Blob.
Sorry?
It's a big blob.
A big blob. it likes to blame climate skeptics for the failure of policies, like either domestic or global. I think, for instance, the BBC's revision of the ClimateGate affair, which we'll be discussing on Wednesday, if you want to tune in, guys. That was apparently enough to stall Copenhagen, the COP meeting in 2009, and similarly, climate skeptics are held as the sort of the barrier to climate policy in the UK for net zero. Like any story about the climate, the failure of climate policy to get anywhere and to be implemented is always the fault of the GWPF, James Delingpole, and a couple of other writers in the Telegraph, and the Spectator. Nobody's quite sure which way, and so on. But this doesn't seem very plausible to me, and I keep trying to make this point to people who sort of inevitably troll us on these points. The blob has extraordinary resources. It's got supranational agencies. It's got institutional science. All of those university departments, the governments, many governments, almost the entire media until recently. Why then are they so scared of a single organization and a couple of journalists, which has a budget probably equivalent to a couple of senior civil servants' salaries? I'm reminded that the chief executive of the Climate Change Committee, Chris Stark, takes home, including benefits, about £320,000. That's equivalent to a small think tank. What's going on there? Why do green policies and these politics fail, and why do they try and blame people?
The Green Bloc is very, very concerned, and rightly so, because for one single reason. We have very, very compelling arguments. Now, you're absolutely right. In Britain, these arguments for the past 12 years haven't really made any difference because there's the all-party consensus. All institutions are banging on about net zero or the climate emergency. But look at the US, look at Australia, look at some other places where the situation is slightly different. In the US, critics of climate policies are very influential. It's not an all-party consensus. It's a very partisan issue. So people realize that arguments can be very dangerous, which is why the Green Bloc is trying to essentially prevent any debate, prevent any arguments. In the US, it's more difficult because you have the federal system, you have different states, you have Republican states, Republican radio and television stations. And so there's a much, much more vibrant atmosphere of discussion. And once people listen to the arguments, you know, they make their own own minds. Remember that whenever we engage in a debate with, conventional climate campaigners or scientists or politicians, and we've done that in the past, whenever there is a proper debate, there's a clear shift of opinion in our direction because we have very powerful arguments. That's why people don't like us or our arguments. Right. That's why the Green Bloc is concerned. And with the cost of net zero and the problems of net zero, we're beginning to see a real shift in public mood towards the arguments we've been making for the last 12 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose in a sense that those discussions in other parts of the Anglosphere, essentially, you've got the America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and less extent Ireland, but they're in particular Australia and perhaps Canada, very energy intensive because of their climate, hot and cold. And people are much more sensitive to that than certainly in most of the UK. But Canada does seem quite on a course for either some kind of collision with reality in that respect that may leave people very cold. And I think Australia has gone net zero too.
Yeah,
Why?
of course. They've all tried over the last 20, 30 years. They've all tried. You know, the Australian situation in particular, they've tried to come up with some kind of policies to appeal to the public, and then the prime ministers were, sacked or purged. It's the reality is that most countries, if they are not blessed like Sweden with a lot of hydro power, most countries can't survive without a lot of fossil fuel. And
so it looks like
even true for Britain. Britain won't be able to survive without natural gas, and any attempt to close down natural gas will just cause economic disaster.
So, I mean, it looks like a sort of a game of chicken in a way, doesn't it? With policy, I mean, you can see why sort of quite remote policy throughout those countries, quite remote governments, quite detached from their populations, sort of daring each other on with the institutions and the other forces that sort of urging them on in the way that Boris has been urged on. And they're sort of daring each other to take it one step further. Net zero, and no doubt we'll get net zero.
But we are reaching a point where it's simply no longer working. Think about Germany. Right. It's a good example.
Yeah, there's a good. Yeah.
The next German government will include the Green Party, right? So it will be a coalition between the Social Democrats and the Liberals and the Green Party. The price the Greens have to pay for being part of this coalition government is they have to accept that natural gas is classified as a sustainable form of energy, right? So the Green Party, who have been for the last 20 years saying, climate emergency, climate alarm, we have to get rid of fossil fuels, just to get into government, they have to say, oh, natural gas is actually a green form of energy, which is sustainable. Why? Because without natural gas, Germany would collapse.
And next clean coal, right?
Yeah. Pardon?
Yeah, and then coal, they'll go, and then coal's green as well.
Well, coal, they will obviously want to. On coal, they are, of course, radical. Will phase out coal. The problem with the Greens, the biggest mistake of the German Greens, of course, was to be completely anti-nuclear and to phase out nuclear. Once you phase out nuclear and once you phase out coal, all you've got left is natural gas, which comes from Vladimir Putin. And so the Greens are stuck with natural gas, and they have to now accept that natural gas is not dangerous to the climate. It's a sustainable form of energy which can be subsidized. So the German government will subsidize fossil fuels, right, for the Greens to get some ministerial jobs. That just tells you they don't believe a bloody thing they say. It's all about money and power. Once that is in question, they will change everything they once claimed.
So where I was going to go with that was, why hasn't there been a more popular movement in response to this? I mean, the intention. I mean, we accept that. We argue that there are going to be these huge social transformations that are required by the net zero agenda, whether it's a global one or whether any country like the UK does it unilaterally. But most people are completely disengaged from it. Why? But people stand to.
Because we live in a wealthy country, by and large, and because the costs so far have been, they didn't really hurt that much, but there's a threshold. There's a limit to how much people are willing to pay, and a limit of pain. And we are approaching that threshold. As energy prices and the cost of living goes up, the willingness of people to accept that kind of policy goes down quite significantly. So I am pretty sure that this is not sustainable politically, and there will be a huge and massive backlash. It's just a question of time.
That's something
is not sustainable.
Yeah, that's something Steve Baker has been pointing out, hasn't it?
Of course,
he's
because he's also concerned about the burden to ordinary families, and also the consequences to his own party. Imagine his party making life more difficult and more miserable for their own voters.
He seemed to be alone at the outset. Are there more people sort of?
He's not alone anymore.
No.
There are now more than 40 MPs organizing themselves in a, what are they called, net zero scrutiny group, and they are actually expecting to get to up to 100 MPs as energy prices go up. So this will be a very powerful group of MPs, backbench MPs, who will fight any further, increase in pain and burden to their constituents. It's, millions of families will struggle to keep warm this winter, and energy prices. Today there was a story in the press that up to 20 energy suppliers are facing bankruptcy, going belly up, with huge implications for the cost for those who survive. So obviously, everyone will have to carry the burden of these collapsed companies. So energy prices are currently only going one way, and believe you me, the public will respond to that kind of increasing burden.
So we're seeing, as well as seeing these new MPs. I'm glad to hear that there's sort of more chatter about doing that. I hope it's comes to more, and there's more cross-party stuff. But there is, I've never seen in the 20 years, I guess, that I've been involved in this debate. I'm now struggling, whereas I would have sort of bookmarked a couple of articles a week that were quite obscure. I'm now losing track of the articles that are appearing that are critical. There's a change. I mean, it may be something to do with the broadening out of the news agenda with people, not just the arrival of GB News, but the recognition that there was a problem. Do you think that's true? Are we getting a new, or I don't know whether it would call it a new polarization or a depolarization? In fact, you're getting.
No, absolutely. I think the realization that these policies will burden families enormously, that will cost, astronomical sums. The issue of net zero, the radical kind of utopian policies that will hurt families left, right, and center, and the realization that for the first time, backbench MPs are beginning to organize, are beginning to actually speak out. And the columnists, I mean, would you believe it? For the last 10 years, everyone said, oh, we go green and it's all wonderful, and the renewables and so on. And suddenly, people are beginning to look into it and scrutinize it and analyze it and shake the tree. Yeah, we do live. I mean, this shift in mood is quite manifest. And as you said, I can't keep up with all the columnists and articles critical of these policies. It's amazing.
Do you think it will last after COP26? I mean, do you think they're going to, with or without a deal? Let's forget the deal nonsense. Do you think
they will get a deal? They'll get it. They always get a deal in the last minute. As I said, there will be a deadlock. There will be a crisis. COP will face failure, collapse, disaster.
Right. But
then in the last minute, they will save the COP and have an agreement. I mean, look, they have an agreement at G20 today. They had an agreement.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Boris said, we're inching forward. We had little progress. Okay, so little progress. We've had little progress for 40 years. A little bit more progress.
Yeah. But will this new debate, will the depolarization or polarization, depending which way you look at it, is that going to be able to survive COP26? I mean,
it will get much worse, because people are beginning to realize that the Chinese, the Indians, most of Asia, Africa, they have no intention whatsoever to decarbonize. That's becoming obvious now, that they have no intention whatsoever. Never mind, they couldn't, even if they wanted to, let's face it, right? China couldn't power its economy by solar and wind. Are you, joking? I mean, it's not going to happen. And people are beginning to realize that there is this complete and utter discrepancy between the mantra that we hear every day from the officials and the realization that most of the world is going the opposite direction. So this is only going to get much more polarized. And you saw already this survey where people were asked, are you in favor of a referendum on net zero?
Right.
And clearly, it looks as, basically the country is split already. Net zero will become almost, in my view, almost inevitably the new kind of Brexit type divide in the country.
Brexit wrapped in a poll tax. I actually saw two polls. One was tweeted out by your colleague Harry, and that was this quite interesting transect of British opinion. The public opinion was broadly in favor of net zero policies, but it didn't want to pay for any of it, and that it might. I mean, what was surprising for me was that if you would say, all right, here, put a gun in here, how much would you pay to stop climate change, right? And I think it's nonsense, but if you say, like, how much would I put in my pocket just to get you not to shut up, right? It was, I'd say, £5 or £10 a week, but that's actually more than the pro-green public seemed to be paying. They didn't want to pay anything. They didn't want, and they said cars should be banned, but not my car. Flights should be banned, but not my flights. And
look, there is a great story in the Sunday Times, the Irish edition of the Sunday Times today, I noticed. And I wasn't aware of that, but it says 80% of the Irish voters are in favor of tackling climate change and climate policies and decarbonization, and 82% of Irish voters don't want to pay a single cent for taxes or tax rises. So if you're asked in the streets by some of these kind of pollsters, are you in favor of saving the planet? Are you in favor of the government taking these kind of radical measures to tackle climate change? People will say yes. But when you then ask, are you in favor of tax rises to do that? Are you in favor of paying for it? They will say no. The same people.
It's a great microcosm, isn't it, of this sort of the green dream, living in this sort of utopian fantasies. Everything's symbolic and everything's easily opinions come very easily, but then actually doing stuff, actually paying stuff, actually making money, actually going to work every day, taking the kids to school, going and doing the shopping, that's all your zero level. And all, yeah.
People are being told that this kind of green revolution, like Boris, green revolution, jobs, and this will always, they are being told that this is all on the cheap, that this will be good for the economy, will be good for jobs, will be good for you, will be good for your home, will be good for your family, everything will be good. Great. People, what's not to like? So why would you need to raise taxes if everything is so good, right?
And then we had to
ask, are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing to eat less meat? Are you willing to not go abroad for your holidays? Are you willing not to drive the car and so on? They said, why? Hold on.
We even had the Treasury and the Business Secretary disagreeing this week about whether taxes are going to be sky high or whether green taxes are going to be nothing. It's so there's the not even
stupid. People are not stupid, okay? They say, okay, you want to sell me a green revolution? Fine. What does it cost? Nothing? Fine. Let's have 2 of them. But if it's, if it means we have to pay for it, no, thank you. We don't want it. It's as simple as that. And this is part of the problem. Governments in Europe in particular have promised the world to their voters. This green change, green energy is so much cheaper than this dirty fossil fuel energy. We will create all these millions of jobs and we'll have energy will be cheap. None of it, of course, is true. And this is beginning to hit home. We're beginning to see that all these promises, all these pledges, all these slogans are simply unrealistic, never have been realistic, and people are beginning to feel cheated, essentially.
Benny, I think that's a good place to end our discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben, and good luck.
Thank you very much. I hope we'll have some more. I hope this can carry on, and good luck with Net Zero Watch. I'm sure we'll hear lots more from you.
And I look forward to every day of FLOP26.
I hope we'll produce some good stuff. Right. Well, thank you very much, Benny, and thank you very much for tuning in and watching. I think I should just say another thank you to all of these supporters, and apologies for some of the technical glitches and the terrible backdrop that I'm sitting in front of, which I'm going to try and fix tomorrow. With that, have a good night and see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we've got Austin Williams. Austin is going to talk about eco-colonialism and eco-racism. That's not a woke view. Tune in; it's very, very interesting discussion from Austin, who's been an ardent critic of the miserabilist agenda, he would call it, I imagine, for a long time. Right. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.